Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. On today's Fronteras, we visit with the new executive director of La Casa in Las Cruces. First, we want to spotlight a Chicana choreographer, Alicia Mulligan, who is opening minds and challenging long-existing stereotypical notions of who can be a dancer.
I really believe that dance is a language.
Better, nice. Whatever that moment was where you felt like the world was coming down on you, like you were gonna be taken down, really pull out of that, right? Refuse to be taken down.
What I want to do as a teacher is to empower students to feel comfortable as themselves, to be able to step into a space and be like, this is who I am, and my voice matters.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hop, drop.
I'm Alicia Mulligan. I'm a Chicana choreographer, dancer, and teaching artist in Seattle. I think it's really important to show representation and to show the voices that aren't always heard or aren't always seen here, specifically in dance. The idea about what a dancer is or looks like has not shifted much in a long time.
Randy, if that feels better.
I'm not the stereotypical dancer size body. I'm not tall, long, thin, blonde hair, blue eyes. I was told many times, like, you're wasting your time, you don't look like a dancer, maybe this isn't the place for you. I would try to appease them and say, well, I'm gonna be a choreographer, so I'll be behind the scenes, and I would hear things like, well, no one's gonna let you choreograph on them when you look like that. And those are some pretty deep wounds that still affect me. And still, like, when I enter a rehearsal process, I still hear those voices.
So let Cheryl kind of press through and you can sort of react to that.
After college, I kind of started to reevaluate what is it that I really want to see in dance. So I started to come back to sort of my roots and the things that I really love about dance. Being expressive as a dancer, dancing to the music, hearing a beat or a drum or something and just wanting to express in a way that feels really good. The piece that I'm working on now is called Reina, which means queen. Reina is a tribute to my mother and to my grandmother and all the sacrifices that they have made emotionally and physically. My grandmother raised 10 kids in the projects. In my mind, she's the ultimate queen. What I've learned from her is just a really honest and true love. My husband and I are working on composing the music. Can we leave that part in there? The like swell? Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah. If we sample part of my nana saying it, and then maybe I can echo her saying it.
Esperas que me desmaye y caiga en tu...
The poem is something that I wrote, so I took it to my grandma and asked her to read it.
Esperas que me desmaye y caiga en tus brazos.
People aren't sure how to categorize my work a lot of times. It references culture, but it's not a cultural dance. It feels like an attack a little bit towards the audience, like, I'm here, you better watch me, versus the I'm here for entertainment and to look pretty. it's like I have a story to tell, and you're sitting in that seat, so I'm gonna tell it.
In the United States, an average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every minute. This equates to more than 10 million abuse victims annually. My guest today is Henry Brutus. He's the executive director of La Casa Incorporated in Las Cruces, which specializes in domestic violence emergency shelter relief and comprehensive services to help families living with violence in our community. Henry, welcome to Fronteras.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
I say you're the new executive director, but you've been there for a year now, right?
Not quite. I wish. It feels like it. It's been about 4 months.
It's been about 4 months?
Correct.
Tell me, what are some of the challenges that our community faces when it comes to domestic violence?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I think that domestic violence is really a national or societal issue. What's actually reported, I know you just read some stats, the problem is even worse than that because there's a lot of cases that are not reported. The challenge really is people not talking about it. I mean, really, if you think about it in layman's terms, domestic violence is not sexy. So no one really discusses that until they're in a situation where it's legal or financial, and it's really too late at that point. So, personally, I feel we should be talking about that more. What are signs and symptoms that we need to look for, and also us as friends, families, be vigilant and offer support or know where to turn to offer support to someone that may or may not be experiencing a relationship. And it's really not to wait until that happens, but really to see the signs beforehand and try to prevent that from happening altogether.
Let's get to the basics. What is domestic violence?
Domestic violence the most common form people think it's physical abuse. It's, typically, and I disagree with that term, but typically it's a man physically hitting a woman. But domestic violence actually takes on many more forms than that. It can be emotional abuse. So I've always, my grandmother used to say words can hurt a lot more than, fists. So it's emotional abuse. It's also behavior. So for instance, now we have with social media, we have stalking on Facebook or social media pages. We have bullying online. So all of these also take forms of domestic abuse. It's any form of inequality or inequity that occurs in a relationship, in an intimate relationship.
Do you see a form of domestic violence taking place in relationships on the high school age with teenagers?
Yes, it does exist, and as a result, we plan to, this coming school year, is to actually work a lot in the middle school and high schools to do what we're calling our outreach or prevention work. We don't want, the cycle to continue. As you can imagine, it takes a huge financial toll on families. It takes a huge emotional toll on the two people that are involved, as well as those that are connected closely. It also takes, if it goes further and the police or law enforcement is involved, it takes a legal toll. So we'd like to stop that. And I think the best place to stop that is actually in our youth so that this pattern does not perpetuate over time.
What programs do you offer to get the word out? La Casa employs about 40 people. Is that nearly enough to cover our entire community?
That's a great question. I'm still finding out. We typically have been more of I'd say before my tenure, we've been more of a reactionary agency. So we're there for people that are actually already in the cycle of violence, if you will call it that. The plan is going forward as of August, and you'll see some things roll out in the community where we actually try to get ahead of that. We'll still be an emergency shelter and take care of those that are in situations that need safety or education, but we'll also we'll try to get in the forefront of that also to make sure, the goal really is to keep family units intact, whatever that is, whether that's parent and child or parents, men and women or same-sex relationships. So it's just to really keep them intact.
First and foremost, you are a shelter, correct?
We are, correct.
And so that means that you take calls from throughout our community of people that feel like they're in a domestic violence situation. What steps do you take when somebody walks through the door or calls your number and says, I'm in a violent situation?
Really safety first. So that's our priority, 24 hours, 7 days a week. So if someone is in a situation, we take their word for it, first of all, because we want to make sure they're safe. So whether that means we go pick them up at a location where they feel safe, the point is to get them in our shelter as quickly as possible. From that point on, then we go through the dynamics to make sure that indeed the situation is what it is, because sometimes people don't report a full situation. We've had cases where someone who actually is the offender calls in as if they're the victim, and we don't house the offenders, obviously. So, but the first step is always safety first, is to make sure that person is safe.
How is police involved in this situation? Do you notify police that you've got a victim of domestic violence?
We are first responders. In other words, if there's a situation that involves a child or harm to someone that could be fatal, whether to yourself or someone else, then we have to notify police. Other than that, it's really on the couple or the people involved in the relationship to notify police or not if there was significant harm.
What are some of the stories that you can share of some of the victims that have come in? Because you have victims that might be not have any children, but you also have children that are being impacted.
Correct. We have, you can imagine, I think I saw a tagline that says domestic violence does not respect social economic status or religion or race, etc. So really it can happen in any family. It can happen from a situation that gets out of hand as one time, or it can happen as a situation that exists, throughout the relationship. So we currently, for instance, we have probably just as many adults as we have children in our shelter. Many of the families that come into shelter, or parents that come into shelter, come with children, or if they come alone, the children follow pretty quickly after, depending on what their legal situation is. So the dynamics are, it's pretty much anyone that's in our community. That's the stats that I've seen recently are 1 in 3 women have a domestic violence situation in their lifetime in the state of New Mexico, and then 1 in 4 men.
1 in 3 women in the state of New Mexico.
Correct.
And how many men?
1 in 4.
1 in 4 men. So this is not just men that are causing domestic violence, women too?
Not at all, correct. We've seen men come in as victims. We've also seen women come in as offenders. So it happens. Of course, I may be biased as a man, but I think men underreport that quite a bit more. But it happens. Again, when you take away just the physical abuse part and you also add emotional and other forms of abuse, it can actually be pretty equal, men and women.
Let's talk about some myths of domestic violence. What are some myths of domestic violence?
I think one we just identified is that men are always the offenders. I think that's really a myth. That's not true. Men tend to be physically stronger, perhaps, but that does not mean that, again, not all men are offenders also. I think I've heard that in passing. I've known many relationships where there's been no cases of domestic violence. So it's really certain relationships. There's also this myth that, going with the line of men being the offenders, we know for a fact right now there are a lot of younger, especially the 17, 18, 19-year-old population of men who are incarcerated because they were involved in a case of domestic violence. But what we mostly fail to understand is if you grow up in a domestic violence family, in a family where that exists, chances are that you will repeat that cycle. Statistically, that's been proven. In addition to that, there's an opportunity. I just read a case just this week where a young man, he's 16 years old, grew up in this family where there's domestic violence, got tired one day of seeing his mom being strangled and physically abused, and took matters in his own hand and stabbed the male figure in the house and was arrested as a domestic violence offender. Well, is that really the case?
How do you end the cycle? Because, we're talking about generations of families that might not report it, that grow up in it, and then they too partake.
And may not even know what they're doing is wrong because that's what they grew up in.
How do they know what's wrong and what's right?
And that's what we're trying to do. It's really start at the youth, because I think they have an opportunity to teach those that come after them, and also have, if you know the signs, I know the signs, all of our friends and family know the signs. So if they say we see you in a relationship where it may be somewhat toxic, we can be more vigilant and say, you know what, this is not right, and maybe approach it differently and say, do you need some support? Do you need some help? What can we do to help you? And maybe address that relationship as it's happening and unfolding before, more people are involved, that we may not want it to go that route. So,
what are some of the reasons that you hear from victims of domestic violence on why they don't report it?
Many cases, I think, especially us being a border city, a border community, part of it is documentation. I think we have a lot of victims who are not legally here. So there's that threat that I will report you and get you sent back to wherever. There's also an economic inequality. So if the male, in this example, if the man is the only one who provides financially for the family, there's that thought, if I report this person, then I won't have a place to live, I won't have any money to live, I won't have clothes, I won't have any of that. And there are threats being made of that also. The children are often used also as tools, unfortunately. It's, you report this and I'll take the kids away from you. I know a lawyer, I can pay for a lawyer where you can't. So there are a lot of dynamics. I mean, there are so many different situations where this occurs.
In these type of situations where a victim is empowered enough to report it, I mean, they have to overcome so much, whether or not they're going to be believed, whether or not they're going to have the financial resources to continue life without them. What kind of support does La Casa offer them?
Well, yes, that's a very good question. That's where we come in, I think, as a good support system for that person or family. First, we provide the shelter, so they don't have to worry about housing or where they're going to live. Shelter comes with 3 meals a day, snacks in between. We also give them skills such as literacy skills for English if they're not English speakers as a first language. We provide computer skills. We try to get them where they can be back in the workforce. We have a full clothing store where we can dress them up for an interview or provide clothing, because sometimes people come in with whatever they were wearing that night, and they just come into shelter. We also do parenting class, so that way that parent and the children also participate in classes, but that way that cycle stops there, hopefully. Especially, we have a lot of cases where the families actually come back together once the person is out of shelter. So we want to make sure that that relationship is a good relationship going forward after that. In addition to that, we have legal advocates. So we do talk to the person and educate them on what their rights are, and also how do they secure a U visa, for example, if they're not here legally. How do they access these services? We also link them with legal aid or Catholic charities to provide the legal help. We have an immigration advocate in our in-house also that can help with some of these processes. So really we try to be as comprehensive as possible to make sure that everything that's needed or everything that would be a gap, say someone reported and came forward, that's addressed, so they don't have to worry about that, at least in that time frame. And then hopefully we get them on their feet so that they can be sustainable on their own if the relationship does sever.
What can community members that are not victims of domestic violence do to help La Casa? You mentioned that you have clothing for the victims to dress for interviews. What else can the community do to help? A
lot. Actually, I think community members should be involved in the sense of at least finding out what are the signs of domestic violence. What should I look for? Because this could happen.
Let's talk about signs. What are some of the signs?
Some of the signs are, anger that's unmanaged, irritation. Like, in a relationship, I mean, if you think of the way I like to describe a relationship is when you first start to date someone, you're bringing roses, you're pulling the doors, you're really trying to win that person's heart. When a relationship is toxic, that does not exist anymore. It's really, you really treat that person like the gum under your shoe, which no one should be treated that way. So it's about respect and dignity. And once those boundaries are broken, that's definitely something to look out for and see what exactly is going on in that relationship. It can quickly deteriorate, as you can imagine. Going back to the community though, it's, once you identify the signs, as far as helping immediately, you can volunteer.
You do take volunteers.
We do so much, and we're trying to really cover all of Doña Ana, including the southern part of the city. We actually get calls from outside of our community, again, for safety reasons. But so volunteering is definitely important for all angles. I mean, from administrative to actually community work, where we're actually in the neighborhoods talking to people, presenting, doing tabling, to, collection of items, such as, we need everything. We have people that have born their baby in the shelter. We have people that bring their newborn baby to shelter, or teenagers. So they need clothing, they need, toiletries, they need toys, so we need everything. Really, we also, as a 501c3, we need, money. So that's very important as well.
Where does your funding come from?
Most of our funding, about 80% of our funding currently, is from state and federal grants. So that's where we get most of our funding.
You rely on 20% to come from individual
20%
donations?
come from individual donations, events, and private foundations.
Let's talk about some of the upcoming events that you've got. You've got the Purple Purse Challenge. Is that new?
It's coming very soon. No, actually, La Casa's been involved in that in, I believe, at least 5 years.
Okay.
And the idea, which is really fun to me anyway, because I understand I'll have to wear around a purple purse, which is fine. I'll probably try to get you to wear one too.
Okay.
But
Come in.
it's through the Allstate Foundation, and what they do is really it's a fun way through contests, especially social media contests, to get people to recognize purple is the national color for domestic violence.
Which you are wearing?
Yes, appropriately, yes. So, it's a way to try to raise some funding and more than anything else, some awareness about domestic violence. Unfortunately, it's that month of October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but really it's something I wish we could do all year long as a campaign.
One of the events I'm very familiar with, because when I worked in commercial broadcasting, I remember hearing a commercial for the La Casa Holiday Bazaar.
That's our
And
signature event.
That's your
yes.
signature event.
Yes.
And it happens every December. What is it?
This year it's November 30th, December 1st and 2nd at the Convention Center. It's an event, really it's early Christmas shopping at awesome rates. It's stuff that's made here locally, so we try to feature people that actually get their hands dirty.
These are
and
homemade.
do stuff. Homemade items, including the bakery. Everything is homemade. And it's an opportunity to get your Christmas shopping done. We'll have some really great items. I'm looking at bringing in some things that we haven't done in the past. So if you've gone in the past, we welcome you to come again this year. We'll add some different flavors to things. So it's very exciting, but we'll be announcing that very soon.
That's great. Now, prior to this job, you worked with the El Paso Diabetes Association for
That's correct.
almost 14 years.
Yes.
And you also worked at the William Beaumont Army Medical Center for 6 years. What made you decide to move to something that can be very heart-wrenching, to hear stories, to see this every single day? What made you decide to do this?
That's an awesome question. I think, I saw some parallels between healthcare, which is what I've always done, and domestic violence. I think in healthcare, there are these heart-wrenching questions also, especially when you think now with the whole insurance debate. So some people cannot afford certain care. Others, unfortunately, especially in a hospital setting, some people do not recover. They come in and they actually pass away. So that can be very heart-wrenching also. With domestic violence, what I saw is an opportunity to actually make a difference right away. I felt like I could come in and through certain programs and certain things that we put in place, looking at things from an innovative angle, we can actually make an impact. And to me, really, if we can save one family from going through, the worst of domestic violence, then I'm happy.
Now, you've been there for about 4 months, 5 months by the time this airs.
Yes.
Have you had a rewarding experience that made you realize that you made the right decision to come to our community and work for La Casa?
Yes, I've had more than one. I'll share one. My second week in the position, in the role, I walked into our shelter. I try to do rounds as often as possible just to meet our employees as well as meet the people that are actually residing in our shelters. And that morning, unfortunately, we had mom and daughter staying in our shelter. Mom had to check in with her probation officer. Unfortunately, urinalysis was dirty and mom was booked. So now we're left with this child who's, as you can imagine, crying incessantly, cannot be controlled because mom is her world. That's all she knows. And what do you do? So right then and there, as heart-wrenching as that was, it told me that I was in the right place. This is, you have to think on your feet. You have to work with so many other organizations. I think Las Cruces is a perfect community. I came from El Paso, as you mentioned, and in El Paso, I think we're a little bit more territorial versus Las Cruces. I felt the community really loves to work together and came together and made sure that, at the end of the day, I'd say it was a very successful story. It ends really well, but it took a lot of partners and including, the detention center where she was, to actually come together and work together to make this happen. So that was my eye-opening lesson on week 2, and just said, yes, I'm in the right place. So I just hope I'm up to the task.
Why is it important that the public understand what La Casa does? In closing.
Very important, because we're here in this community. I mean, we're blessed to have a shelter in our community. And again, we're not just a shelter. We really look at ourselves as a domestic violence prevention and education organization. So we're not here just to take care of issues when they happen, but we're here to also try to prevent and educate and make people aware of the situation. So La Casa is part of this community. It's not a national organization or anything like that. So it's Las Cruces' own. So I think our community needs to embrace that.
Henry, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Fronteras, Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. Have a safe and pleasant week.